bien en anglais. We started? Great, good. Okay, hi everyone, this is question 2. Let me do my little tiny speech. Let me get my sweater down. My little speech, where whatever, 15 or 20 minutes before class. I've got some valiant souls here, being my camera person. And we're doing question 2. Let me get into it. Okay, the second question is kind of hard actually. And that is why why is Socrates considered a Christian thinker, or why could one consider Socrates as a Christian thinker? And this is not a question that has an obvious and simple point of reference. That is to say, you've got to dig this out of a study of both classical antiquity and Christianity. Here's my little 5 minutes or better answer. And speaking to the students, you can do with this whatever you want. And of course, you only have to choose one of the 3 questions. And so you don't necessarily have to do this one. So getting into it. Okay, first of all, I would say that the primary comparison, or the primary connection between Socrates and Judeo-Christianity is the whole idea of caring for one's soul. This is an expression, care for the soul, that is found in Plato and is said to come from Socrates. We looked at it in the Apology quite a few times. Now, the whole major point here is that there's a contrast, that is to say, between thinking that material things, either consumer items or power, are the main things in life. And of course, most people most of the time think about money and power. What both Socrates and Judeo-Christianity are saying is that should not be the case. And of course, Socrates and Jesus have different notions of what it means to care for the soul, but that one should care for one's spiritual life, and not in the primary way the material life is common to both of them. Okay, so somewhat in contrast to that, and I think number 1 is the fundamental thing. The second one, I think, is really interesting because so many people see this in different ways, okay? And Socrates coins the expression gadfly. Gadfly is just a metaphor for a critic, and an irritating critic. And he sees the philosopher as inevitably put into that role. That's what we saw in the Apology. Socrates went around the agora basically making people mad at him, thus the trial and thus his death. If you think about it, Jesus is really not so different. I mean, once again, their perspective is different. However, there's still a lot of overlaps. And so I think this whole idea of the philosopher in whatever guise, as a gadfly, as a critic, as an irritant, as someone who challenges the status quo, is really important. 3 is the whole mission of philosophy, and this is, once again, the perspective of Jesus and Socrates. It is completely different. However, their task is very similar. That is to say, to lead men out of ignorance and sin to a higher plane. Now, the higher plane for Socrates is sort of indeterminate. The higher plane for Jesus is extremely clear. And that's something, if I were you, I would really think about it, the specific goals of Jesus and Socrates, and seeing the similarities and the differences. And I see I'm missing a period here, so let's see what this is. Yes. And the other, 4th one, I think, is the heroic theme, and that is to say, Socrates is willing to risk his life just in the same way Jesus is. You could also see that as an inevitable conflict. That is, what we saw in the cave, what we saw in the Apology, what we saw in the Sermon on the Mount is very similar, and a very similar dynamic. That is to say, if I'm acting as a gadfly, if I'm proposing higher values, if I'm trying to lead men to higher plane. I'm inevitably going to have conflicts. Those conflicts can result in the loss of my life. And this is where I think the readers of the history of philosophy have to take a hard, serious look at what philosophy really is. Because not all philosophers, of course, are as adamant about the high moral purpose of philosophy as Socrates is. Okay, that's question 2. Bing.